My beloved child. There is something unfolding behind the scenes that you were never meant to force, chase, or control. Yet somehow, your spirit has sensed it. You have felt those strange moments of anticipation. Those unexplained emotions that appeared without warning. The feeling that something important was moving beneath the surface of your life while the visible world remained quiet. That feeling was not imagination. It was preparation. Because recently, in a place you know nothing about, among conversations you were never supposed to hear, your name unexpectedly entered a discussion. Not by accident. Not as a passing thought. Your name carried weight. And the person who was least prepared to hear it was the one soul connected to yours in ways that neither time nor distance has fully revealed. At first, they believed the conversation would be about ordinary things. Daily responsibilities. Future plans. The familiar concerns that fill human minds. But then something shifted. A single comment. A single observation. A single unexpected mention. And suddenly the atmosphere changed. Your soulmate felt it immediately. The room may have appeared normal to everyone else, but inside their heart, something paused. Something listened. Something awakened. Because when your name was spoken, it did not sound like the version of you that fear has whispered into your ears. It did not sound like the version shaped by disappointments. It did not sound like the version that doubted whether anyone truly saw your worth. No. What they heard was something entirely different. They heard pieces of your character that you rarely give yourself credit for. They heard qualities you display when nobody is watching. The quiet strength. The resilience. The way you continue moving forward even when life offers no immediate reward. And as those words filled the conversation, your soulmate found themselves unable to ignore the strange feeling growing inside. A feeling they could not explain. A feeling that made them wonder why your name carried such significance. Why hearing about you felt different from hearing about anyone else. Why a simple conversation suddenly felt like a moment they would remember. But this is where the story becomes even more surprising. Because the discussion did not end after your name was mentioned. In fact, that was only the beginning. The more they listened, the more questions formed inside them. Questions they had never considered before. Questions about timing. Questions about purpose. Questions about why certain people repeatedly appear in our lives long before we understand their importance. And while they sat there trying to make sense of these feelings, another realization quietly approached. One that neither they nor anyone else in that conversation expected. Because there was one detail about you. One truth. One hidden piece of the puzzle. That was about to transform the entire direction of the discussion. And when those next words were finally spoken, everything changed. A strange thing happens when destiny begins drawing two paths closer together. The signs rarely arrive with noise. They arrive in whispers. And while that conversation continued, your soulmate found themselves becoming unusually quiet. Not because they had lost interest. But because something inside them had become deeply attentive. Every word seemed to carry a meaning hidden beneath the surface. Every observation about you felt connected to something larger. Something they could not yet define. What made this even more unusual was that nobody in that room appeared to recognize the impact those words were creating. The conversation moved naturally. People spoke casually. Yet your soulmate felt as though time itself had slowed. Because another piece of information had just surfaced. A detail so simple that most people would have overlooked it. But not them. Not this time. The moment they heard it, an unexpected thought crossed their mind. What if there is more to this person than I realize? That question lingered. It refused to leave. And questions like that are powerful. They have a way of opening doors that logic alone cannot unlock. You see, for a long time, your soulmate had been carrying certain assumptions. Assumptions about relationships. Assumptions about what kind of connection they were meant to experience. Assumptions about how meaningful encounters are supposed to begin. But the conversation unfolding before them was quietly dismantling those assumptions one by one. Because the picture being painted was not ordinary. The person being described was not someone driven solely by appearances. Not someone seeking attention. Not someone defined by temporary circumstances. Instead, the image that emerged was of someone whose greatest qualities often remained unseen. Someone who had endured seasons that others never fully understood. Someone who kept showing up despite setbacks. Someone whose heart had been tested yet had not lost its ability to hope. And as those truths surfaced, your soulmate felt an unfamiliar sense of respect growing inside them. Not attraction alone. Not curiosity alone. Something deeper. The kind of respect that forms when a person begins recognizing substance beneath the surface. Meanwhile, there was another force quietly working in the background. A realization neither of you could yet see. Because while your soulmate was learning unexpected things about you, they were also being confronted by something within themselves. Old doubts. Old fears. Old beliefs they had carried for years. Beliefs that had convinced them certain connections were impossible. Beliefs that had convinced them they needed to protect their heart from disappointment. But your name. Your story. Your energy within that conversation was challenging those beliefs. And that made them uncomfortable. Not in a negative way. In the way truth often feels when it arrives unexpectedly. Because truth has a habit of exposing walls we forgot we built. It shines light into places we have avoided examining. And in that moment, your soulmate began seeing parts of themselves with new clarity. Yet they still did not know the most important piece. They still had not heard the statement that would completely alter the atmosphere. The statement that would cause silence to settle over the room. The statement that would leave them staring into their own thoughts long after the conversation ended. Because someone was about to reveal an observation about you. An observation that had been noticed repeatedly. An observation impossible to ignore. And once it was spoken aloud, your soulmate would no longer be able to view this situation the same way again. What happened next was not what anyone expected. And the reaction it triggered would remain with them long after they walked away. There are moments in life when a single sentence carries more power than an entire conversation. This was one of those moments. The room had been flowing through ordinary discussion. Thoughts were exchanged. Opinions were shared. Everything seemed routine. Then suddenly, someone spoke a truth about you that changed the energy completely. Not a dramatic declaration. Not an exaggerated claim. Something far more powerful. A sincere observation. The kind that can only come from paying close attention. The kind that reveals what a person is truly made of. As those words were spoken, your soulmate felt an immediate reaction inside themselves. A reaction they could not explain. Because the description they were hearing did not match the image they had unconsciously created. Instead, it revealed layers. Depth. Character. Strength. And perhaps most surprising of all, consistency. You see, many people shine when circumstances are favorable. Many people appear confident when life is going their way. But the observation being shared was about who you are when nobody is applauding. Who you are when challenges appear. Who you are when the outcome remains uncertain. That was the difference. And that difference mattered. More than anyone realized. Especially to your soulmate. Because deep within them exists a desire they rarely speak about. A longing for something genuine. Something lasting. Something built on foundation stronger than temporary excitement. And as they listened, they began recognizing qualities they had secretly hoped to find in another person. Not perfection. Not flawlessness. Authenticity. The courage to remain true even when life becomes complicated. The courage to keep believing when easier options exist. The courage to grow through difficult seasons rather than becoming bitter because of them. These were the qualities being revealed. And with every passing moment, your soulmate felt their attention becoming more focused. More invested. More curious. Yet what happened next surprised even them. Because after hearing these observations, they did something they had not expected to do. They began reflecting on previous moments. Small moments. Subtle moments. Moments they had dismissed before. Moments that suddenly appeared different in light of what they were hearing now. A memory surfaced. Then another. And another. Tiny puzzle pieces began shifting into place. At first, they tried to dismiss it. They told themselves they were overthinking. They tried returning their focus to the conversation. But the feeling remained. Persistent. Quiet. Impossible to ignore. Because somewhere inside, a realization was beginning to form. Not a complete realization. Not yet. Just the first glimpse. Like seeing the outline of a distant mountain through morning fog. You cannot see every detail. But you know something significant is there. And that realization carried a question. A question that would stay with them long after the meeting ended. What if certain encounters are not random? What if some names continue appearing for a reason? What if certain people enter our awareness because they are connected to a future we have not yet stepped into? That question changed everything. Because once a person begins asking questions like that, they start paying attention. And your soulmate was now paying attention in a way they never had before. But destiny was not finished. Not even close. Because while they were processing these thoughts, another person in that conversation prepared to share something unexpected. Something they had noticed. Something they had kept to themselves until that very moment. A detail so specific. So undeniable. That the room would grow noticeably quieter after it was revealed. And when your soulmate heard it, a feeling they had been trying to ignore would become impossible to escape. The next revelation would not simply capture their attention. It would reach directly into their heart. And once it did, there would be no turning back from what they were beginning to understand. Sometimes the most important revelations do not arrive with certainty. They arrive with recognition. A quiet moment when something hidden suddenly feels familiar. And that is exactly what began happening next. The conversation had already taken unexpected turns. Your soulmate had already heard things that challenged old assumptions. But now, another voice entered the discussion. Calm. Thoughtful. Certain. The kind of voice people naturally listen to when experience has taught them what truly matters. What this person shared was not based on rumor. Not based on wishful thinking. It came from observation. From watching patterns unfold over time. And when they began speaking about you, the room became noticeably still. Because they described something many people spend their entire lives searching for but rarely find. They described integrity. The ability to remain the same person regardless of who is watching. The ability to stay aligned with your values even when shortcuts seem easier. The ability to keep moving forward without needing constant validation from others. At first, your soulmate simply listened. But with every sentence, a strange feeling deepened inside them. Because they realized these were not qualities that could be easily manufactured. These were qualities earned through experience. Through growth. Through challenges. Through moments nobody else fully witnessed. And suddenly, they found themselves wondering about your journey. The chapters of your life they had never seen. The obstacles you had overcome. The lessons hidden behind your strength. The silent battles that shaped the person you have become. For the first time, their curiosity was no longer focused on surface details. It had become personal. Meaningful. Real. Because when someone begins seeing the depth of another soul, something shifts. The connection moves beyond appearances. Beyond assumptions. Beyond first impressions. And whether they realized it or not, that shift had already begun. Yet there was still something missing. One final piece of understanding that had not fully emerged. A feeling hovering just beyond reach. A truth standing at the edge of awareness. Your soulmate could sense it. They could feel that something important was trying to reveal itself. But they could not yet see the entire picture. Then it happened. A brief pause settled over the conversation. Only a few seconds. Yet those seconds felt unusually significant. Because during that silence, someone asked a simple question. A question that appeared ordinary on the surface. But its impact was anything but ordinary. The question was not really about facts. It was not about circumstances. It was about possibility. And the moment it was asked, your soulmate felt their heart react before their mind could respond. That reaction startled them. Because certain feelings cannot be forced. Certain emotions appear only when something genuine is being touched. And for the first time, they stopped resisting what they were sensing. They stopped explaining it away. They stopped dismissing it as coincidence. Instead, they allowed themselves to consider something they had previously avoided. What if this was happening for a reason? What if hearing your name was not random? What if this entire conversation was serving a purpose larger than anyone in that room understood? The possibility lingered. Growing stronger. Growing clearer. And as the meeting slowly approached its conclusion, your soulmate carried that feeling with them. But the story was far from over. Because what affected them most did not happen inside the meeting itself. It happened afterward. When the room emptied. When the voices faded. When they were finally alone with their thoughts. That was when everything they had heard began echoing inside their mind. That was when one particular statement returned again and again. And the more they reflected on it, the more impossible it became to ignore. Because hidden inside that statement was a realization about you. A realization powerful enough to follow them long after the conversation had ended. And during the hours that followed, something unexpected began unfolding within their heart. Something that would ultimately change the way they viewed you forever. Long after the conversation ended. Long after the room had emptied. Long after everyone else had moved on with their day. Your soulmate could not. Something remained with them. Something invisible. A feeling that refused to fade. At first, they tried distracting themselves. They turned their attention toward responsibilities. Toward plans. Toward the endless tasks that demand human attention. But every attempt led them back to the same place. Back to the same thoughts. Back to the same questions. Back to your name. It was not obsession. It was not confusion. It was recognition. The quiet realization that some encounters leave an imprint long before we understand why. As evening approached, they found themselves replaying fragments of the meeting. Certain words stood out more clearly now. Certain observations carried deeper meaning. And one statement in particular continued echoing through their mind. Not because it was dramatic. Not because it was shocking. But because it felt true. Deeply true. The statement suggested something your soulmate had not fully considered before. That the value of a person cannot be measured by what the world immediately sees. That some of the strongest souls are often the quietest. That some of the most meaningful connections begin beneath the surface, long before anyone notices. And those words struck something deep inside them. Because if they were honest with themselves, they had spent much of their life looking outward. Looking for obvious signs. Looking for certainty. Looking for guarantees. Yet the most meaningful things in life rarely arrive that way. Faith does not. Purpose does not. And neither do the connections that change us forever. That realization humbled them. It softened them. It opened a door they did not know existed. For perhaps the first time, they stopped asking, "What do I want?" and began asking a different question. What is this trying to show me? That question changed everything. Because once the heart becomes willing to listen, it begins hearing things the mind often overlooks. And your soulmate was listening now. More carefully than ever before. As the hours passed, memories continued resurfacing. Tiny details. Unexpected moments. Brief impressions they had once ignored. Yet now those moments seemed connected. Like scattered stars forming a constellation. Like puzzle pieces finally revealing part of the image. The picture was still incomplete. But it was becoming clearer. And what they saw filled them with both excitement and caution. Excitement because something meaningful appeared to be unfolding. Caution because meaningful things require courage. They require trust. They require the willingness to step beyond familiar limits. That realization brought them to a crossroads. Not a visible crossroads. An internal one. A place where every person eventually arrives when life presents an opportunity for growth. One path leads back to comfort. Back to old assumptions. Back to familiar patterns. The other path leads toward possibility. Toward discovery. Toward a future not yet fully understood. And standing at that crossroads, your soulmate began sensing which direction their heart wanted to move. Yet one final confirmation was still missing. One final piece of understanding remained hidden. A piece that would arrive unexpectedly. Not through force. Not through pressure. But through timing. Perfect timing. Because while your soulmate was wrestling with these thoughts, circumstances were already beginning to align behind the scenes. Small movements. Small shifts. Small developments that seemed unrelated. Yet each one was quietly preparing the next chapter. The chapter neither of you could see yet. The chapter that would bring a deeper understanding of why your name entered that meeting in the first place. And when that understanding finally arrived, your soulmate would realize that the conversation had never been the destination. It had only been the beginning. The true turning point. The moment that would reveal what all of this was leading toward. Was closer than either of you imagined. There comes a moment in every meaningful story when scattered pieces finally begin moving toward one another. Not all at once. Not in a way that demands attention. But with a quiet certainty that can no longer be denied. This was that moment. The meeting had ended. The conversations had faded. The questions had lingered. And now, something deeper was taking shape. Your soulmate found themselves looking at life through a slightly different lens. The world around them had not changed. The people around them had not changed. Yet something within them had. Because once truth touches the heart, even gently, it becomes difficult to return to old ways of seeing. And that truth was simple. Your name had entered that conversation for a reason. Not because of coincidence. Not because of chance. But because certain realizations arrive exactly when they are needed. The meeting had not created the connection. It had revealed it. It had brought attention to something that had quietly been growing beneath the surface. Something that neither logic nor distance could fully explain. As days continued unfolding, your soulmate noticed subtle shifts inside themselves. A greater awareness. A deeper curiosity. A stronger sense that life was preparing them for something meaningful. And with every passing moment, resistance began fading. The walls that once felt necessary no longer seemed as important. The doubts that once appeared convincing no longer carried the same weight. The fears that had encouraged caution started losing their influence. Because hope was beginning to speak louder. And hope has a remarkable power. It allows people to imagine possibilities they once dismissed. It allows hearts to remain open when experience tells them to close. It allows faith to survive during seasons when answers remain hidden. Your soulmate was entering that space now. A space between uncertainty and understanding. A space where transformation quietly begins. Yet the most beautiful part of this story was never the meeting itself. It was what the meeting awakened. Awareness. Recognition. Possibility. Because the conversation had served as a mirror. It had reflected qualities that deserved to be seen. It had highlighted truths that deserved to be acknowledged. It had reminded your soulmate that meaningful connections are often revealed long before they are fully understood. And perhaps that message is not only for them. Perhaps it is for you as well. Because there may have been moments when you questioned your path. Moments when you wondered whether your efforts mattered. Moments when unseen growth felt invisible. But nothing valuable is ever wasted. Every lesson. Every challenge. Every act of kindness. Every step taken in faith. Each one contributes to the person you are becoming. And the right people eventually recognize what was being built all along. That is the deeper message hidden within this story. Not that someone merely heard your name. Not that a private meeting took place. But that your presence carries significance beyond what you can currently see. That your journey has meaning beyond what circumstances sometimes suggest. That doors often begin opening long before we notice movement on the other side. And now, as this chapter reaches its conclusion, a new chapter quietly approaches. One filled with greater clarity, greater understanding, greater alignment. The answers may not arrive all at once. The full picture may still be unfolding. But something important has already happened. Awareness has been awakened. The seed has been planted. The journey has begun. So continue forward with confidence. Continue forward with patience. Continue forward with faith. Because what is meant for your life does not lose its way. And what is truly aligned with your path will recognize you when the time is right. The meeting is over. The words have been spoken. The realization has begun. And somewhere beyond what either of you can currently see, a beautiful new chapter is preparing to unfold. Yet even after the realization began, even after the meeting had ended, there was one final development that nobody could have predicted. Because some messages are not understood the moment they are heard. They unfold slowly. They reveal themselves layer by layer. And that is exactly what was happening now. In the quiet hours that followed, your soulmate experienced something unexpected. Not a dramatic event. Not a sudden revelation. Something far more powerful. Perspective. The kind of perspective that arrives when the noise fades and the heart finally has room to speak. For the first time in a long time, they stopped looking at life through the lens of what had gone wrong. They stopped focusing on disappointments. On delays. On unanswered questions. Instead, their attention shifted toward possibility. Toward what could still be written. Toward what had not yet unfolded. And strangely enough, every road seemed to lead back to the same thought. The same curiosity. The same unanswered question about you. Why had hearing your name felt so significant? Why had that conversation remained in their thoughts when countless others had been forgotten? Why did it feel as though something important was still waiting to be discovered? The more they reflected, the clearer one truth became. Certain people enter our awareness for a reason. Not always immediately. Not always obviously. But purpose leaves traces. And your presence had left traces. Subtle. Persistent. Impossible to completely ignore. Meanwhile, life continued moving forward. Days unfolded. Responsibilities remained. The world carried on as it always does. Yet beneath the surface, something had changed. Because awareness creates momentum. Once a person begins seeing differently, they begin choosing differently. Thinking differently. Feeling differently. And your soulmate was slowly entering that process. They were becoming more open. More reflective. More willing to trust what their heart had been trying to show them. But here is the part few people understand. Transformation rarely announces itself. It often begins with small decisions. Small moments. Small shifts in perception. And those shifts were already happening. Without realizing it, your soulmate was beginning to release old expectations. Old timelines. Old ideas about how meaningful connections are supposed to appear. Because life rarely follows human scripts. It follows divine timing. And divine timing often works in silence before it works in public. Perhaps that is why this season has felt different. Why certain thoughts keep returning. Why certain feelings refuse to disappear. Why certain paths continue crossing in ways that seem impossible to explain. The answer is not fully visible yet. But the movement has already begun. Like sunrise before the sun appears above the horizon. The light arrives first. Then comes understanding. And that understanding was drawing closer. Closer than your soulmate realized. Closer than you realized. Because another conversation was approaching. Another moment. Another unexpected piece of the puzzle. A moment that would connect things neither of you had connected before. And when that moment arrives, the questions that once seemed confusing will begin making sense. The uncertainty will begin giving way to clarity. And the significance of that private meeting will finally reveal a deeper purpose. But before that happens, one final truth must be understood. A truth that has been quietly hidden within every chapter of this story. And when that truth is revealed, nothing will look quite the same again.